Welcome back to the channel. It's your host, Beastie Worlds, the Soft Sage, also the World Living Ambassador. And I'm here again to give you guys another mental spiritual experience. Strap up for the mental ride. Today's video is the part 1 of a series, and I welcome you to this series. It's a study on consciousness. I realized when I was making my last video that I had to actually talk about consciousness, of what what consciousness is, or my own understanding of what consciousness is. So that's why I'm making this video. And because of how important it is, I'm going to make it into a series. So expect like part 1 to 3 or 4 or 5 parts to what consciousness is, or this video I'm talking about unlocking the psyche behind consciousness. So from the video, a study on consciousness part 1. So let me just dive right in. A study on consciousness. This part 1 now, okay? I'm going to talk about consciousness as a whole. Then the next part, I'll talk about level 1 consciousness. The next part, level 2. Then the next part, level 3. You understand? These are the levels of consciousness I came up with. Okay, you can't find it anywhere else. Although it might be similar, because the levels of consciousness, yeah, they always correlate with other, like the higher level of consciousness, yeah, it always correlates with other levels that you've come across in some other aspects. So you might find some similarities, but it will be different from the level I'm actually explaining on, or what I'm actually explaining on. So back to what I'm actually talking about in this video, which is a study on consciousness, or which is like the plain explanation, not the levels of consciousness. Okay, the plain explanation of what your consciousness is in the first place. You could say your consciousness is yourself. The moment you became consciously aware of yourself, that's how, like that's what brought about your consciousness. Okay, and your consciousness, please just try and understand, your consciousness is not you, it's part of you. It's what makes up you. You are the observer. Your consciousness is like the television. Okay, your consciousness is like the television, and you now, you're the one watching it. So how is that television part of you now? Okay, the television, like, is part of you though, but like it's like, let me just explain. Just bear with me. Just bear with me and let me explain this. Okay, let me just explain this for your understanding, for your correct understanding. Like yourself, yourself, like yourself, when you like, even if you haven't found yourself, or whatever level you find yourself in, even if you are still asleep or something, yourself is quite different from your consciousness. Consciousness now is something that develops as yourself is developing. So as your consciousness is developing, yourself is developing. So in turn, when you develop your consciousness, yourself develops. Yourself is the one that watches, or is the one that like covers your consciousness, because your consciousness is just all you can observe, both on this 3-dimensional density and 4th dimensional density, and whatever dimensional density you find yourself, whether in the dream, reality, or however you want to explain these concepts now, this phenomenon, your consciousness is the one that stores all the information. You can call your consciousness unconscious. It's like your unconscious mind. It's not your consciousness, is not the one that tells you like what to do or something. It's yourself. It's yourself that controls, like the one that is in charge of your thoughts and the rest. It's not your consciousness. So your consciousness is just there, operating steadily without you knowing, steadily amassing information which will work for yourself. You understand? It's like, as your consciousness is developing, yourself is developing, like I said. So beware of what you expose your consciousness to. So once you are exposing your consciousness to deep understanding, deep meanings, as your consciousness is developing, yourself is developing. So the amount of information your consciousness stacks up intercorrelates with the amount of information yourself stacks up. So as the consciousness level is increasing, so does yourself. So does your level of self or level of value increase. So your level of consciousness like is what like gives you that is what gives you that vigor. So let me just like let me cut something out and talk about consciousness. How different consciousness now is different from the mind now. So being aware of your level of consciousness now gives you a super. I'm not going to make this video long, by the way, so I will just keep it short because it's a series video. Okay, I'm going to bring out some other parts, you understand, like I said earlier. So this is just the part one. So I hope I was able to explain something about consciousness in a little bit or in a little way that I could. But let me just touch on one thing before I end this video. Okay, touch on one thing before I end this video. Once you understand that your consciousness is different from yourself, you find out that elevating your consciousness will become much easier, because once you don't tie them together in the same, put them together in the same pot, you understand that the consciousness is always observing, but it's different from you that is observing, because what your consciousness can observe is different from what you can observe. Your consciousness can observe everything at a time. Okay, your consciousness can observe everything at the same time. Okay, but your mind and you now, yourself now, can only observe a fraction of what that consciousness can observe. Just the fraction, be jotting it down, like the fractions you jot down. But that doesn't mean that whatever you observe doesn't affect your consciousness. That doesn't mean that whatever you observe doesn't affect your consciousness. It actually affects, because if your consciousness is improving, yourself is improving. So does, if yourself is improving, your consciousness is improving, but it's not on the same pace. You understand? It's usually not in the same pace. So let me just end the video on this note. I'll bring up another part. You understand? This is just the part one. So there will be part 2, part 3, more parts about what consciousness is about in the first place, before I go on to level 1 consciousness, level 2 consciousness, level 3 consciousness. You understand? So I am the soft sage. I hope I was able to pass on a meta spiritual knowledge today. So thank you. See you guys in the next one. I'm out.